Hello, this week from Boulder, Colorado. We have a couple of short lectures that we're going to do the final week of class. And one of them is on LGB and transgendered older adults. So I don't have a PowerPoint for you for this one. I'm going to go over some common kind of stats and talk a little bit about health disparities, transition into the social aspect of being an LGB&T elder, and some about relationships. Unfortunately, what we don't know a lot about is sexual expression among older LGB&T individuals. So really, we have a little bit about them, thanks to a recent study in the around 2010s, not that long ago, of our largest national study on LGB&T elders, done in conglomeration with 11 different community centers across the U.S. to try to get this sample. So this is where most of the data that I'll talk about today comes from, as well as a little bit from your article on couples. I'm not going to go over the articles on discrimination or treatment in long-term care settings, but I will make some comments in general about that. Okay? So on your screen, you can see this infographic. This is from SAGE. And SAGE is an organization dedicated to older LGB&T individuals. They have lots of great resources. I believe it's on your extra resources for the module this week, but SAGE USA, SAGEUSA.org if you're interested in looking at more resources. They also have some interesting resources for providers in long-term care settings and otherwise in caregivers to be culturally competent in their care with LGB&T elders. So some great resources on that site. Okay, so I'm going to be going back and forth with some data here, but I wanted to start off with the basic demographic stats. So in the US, about 3.8% of individuals report that they are lesbian, gay, or bisexual, or transgendered. So that's of all adults, right? And we have a great inkling that that is underreporting, right? Because there is discrimination and fear involved in reporting your sexual orientation at times, or your gender identity or sexual identity. We know that it's likely that these numbers are larger, particularly among older adults, because they're such a difficult sample to get to. But in the data, when we look at age breakdowns of who is reporting they are an LGBT or T individual, about 1.9% of the 65 plus population are reporting that. So quite a bit lower than the national average, and certainly lower than the around 7% that we get from the 18 to 25-year-old range. Again, keep in mind that doesn't mean there are only 2% of older adults are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. It just means that only 2% report that they are. So that leaves us with about 1.5 million LGB&T, LGB older elders right now. And we estimate that in 2030, that's going to double up to 3 million. So they're a rapidly growing population. So why might that be? Let's take a second to think about that. When we think about the oldest old, middle old cohorts in our current older adult population, these are pre-Stonewall, which was the gay rights movement that the baby boomers experienced, individuals, pre-80s AIDS, HIV, young adults. These are older adults who grew up with lesbian, gay, and bisexuality, and certainly transgender, though we didn't really have words for it, was a criminal offense. It was literally outlawed, and it was also part of a diagnostic disorder in the DSM, right, for up until I think the 70s. So the older olds and the middle olds have lived with quite a bit of stigma and discrimination around being an LGB person. So we see fairly few of them coming out in fairly few of them comfortable with that identity or making that public, whether that is to their family or, as we see on the infographic here, say 40% of LGBT older people 60 to 75 say their healthcare providers don't even know their sexual orientation. So fear of discrimination is a huge driver of that. Let alone being discriminated or cut out of your own family. If you're in heterosexual marriage and no longer feel like that's part of your identity, you have kids, that complicates issues. So this is what we're looking at more and more for the middle and older olds, and including the baby boomers. But as the baby boomers, right, as the population ages, we'll get a lot more people who are post-Stonewall, post-gay rights movement, and certainly in my age cohort and the cohorts below me, we have people who have seen same-sex marriage legalized and becoming more mainstream, although we certainly have a massive issue with discrimination and prejudice against LGBT community currently. And we'll talk a little bit more about the healthcare provider issue. Okay, so that's a little bit about the demographics or the basic background there. One issue that we want to make clear here is that being an LGBT or T older adult has its disadvantages in some ways. And these are all, like any social determination of disadvantage, it's not as if it's a chosen path. It's just something that unfortunately has come along with it. So we see a lot more LGB elders and trans old elders who are economically insecure and they're impoverished. So you can see that when we look at same-sex elder couples, they face higher poverty rates than their heterosexual peers, certainly. So around 9% of and 5% among elder lesbian and gay couples respectively are going to be impoverished, as opposed to only 4.6% of heterosexual couples. And that's a big issue when we think about having resources and having money together and what that gets you: good health care, good mental health care, sort of social capital, those types of things. So some of that, and also just lack of adequate health care and culturally competent health care for LGBT elders, we have a lot of health disparities. For those of you who don't know what that is, that means that it is a difference in the amount of disease, the health care resources available to you, etc. So you're disproportionately out of luck health-wise. When we look at the health disparities that exist for LGBT elders, it's pretty substantial. We have higher blood pressure, more likely to have higher blood pressure, more likely to have higher cholesterol, more likely to have diabetes, more likely to have heart disease, more likely certainly to have HIV and AIDS, and more likely to have serious mental health concerns, including more than half of respondents in a national health study reporting or being told by a doctor that they have depression, and 40% seriously having thoughts of suicide. And over half feeling socially isolated from others. So these aren't problems to laugh at, let's say. They're pretty big deals here. And part of that problem, let me look back at this: 40% of LGBT older say their practitioners don't know. Well, you're at risk in that category. So as an older adult, if you are an LGB or T elder, you are automatically at higher risk for chronic disease, mental health issues, and your provider should and needs to know that. Now, it's not their fault for not saying. Perhaps it's a game between them of not asking and not telling and not feeling comfortable enough in that context to be able to tell somebody. But that is another issue for LGBT elders and why it kind of exacerbates the health disparity problem. So we talked a little bit about social isolation, and I'm going to go through that a little more because we are talking about sort of relationship issues and the social side of sexual expression as much as we can. So 40% of older people say their support networks have become smaller over time, as opposed to only 27% in non-LGB older adults. They are 1 in 3 LGB older adults are living alone, as compared to only 21% of their non-LGB older counterparts. So you're more likely to live alone. You're more likely to be in poverty. You're more likely to have health problems. You're more likely to be in need of a caregiver. But you're also less likely to have what we call your biological family versus your chosen family around you. So social isolation, part of that is because LGB elders have lost a lot of their social support over time, whether it's older gay men and their community shrunk quite a bit given the AIDS epidemic and the fact that we hadn't caught up to it yet. There were a lot of there's a higher mortality rate. So a lot of their peers, if they are out or are in the gay community, are gone. Your chosen family versus your biological family, that's something that you may be familiar with. For older LGB&T people in particular, because again, we had more discrimination, less comfort, pre-Stonewall, it just wasn't okay to do. So if you did come out, you're more likely than younger cohorts to have been completely cut off from family. Your biological family may have disowned you or said, no, we want nothing to do with you. Your older children, if you had any, may have distanced themselves from you, etc. So we see a lot of older LGBT individuals living alone, living more isolated, because as your biological family sort of separates, I guess, from you, you have a chosen family, and that chosen family are the people that you want to be in there, your friends, your peers, your support network. And as we age, our support networks get smaller, but a few things that we know about social support, right, are you're more likely to have better social support if you're married, which is unlikely to be the case for a lot of older LGBT&T individuals, as we just have same-sex marriage coming to the forefront in the past, 5, maybe 10 years if you want to be generous. And so you're less likely to be married, less likely to get the tangible social support as well, those tangible resources as well as just personal social support from that, and the benefits that go along with that. As you age, you're more likely to be widowed or divorced or single or otherwise, just in general, but that's more so for LGB individuals. And your friends or your chosen family, your circle of chosen family, is likely to be very thin. So when you think about it, a chosen family is a very flat generationally. Usually it's made up of your own peers. So if you're all aging together and your mortality rates are likely to be the same, you're going to shrink and shrink and shrink if you don't have multi-generational social support structures like you would in most biological families, right? Adult children, grandchildren, etc. So those are just some issues with social isolation. Let me talk just a little bit more about that. We think about social isolation and living in institutional settings. So older adults like to age in place, we know that, but LGBT&T elders are more likely to be fiercely driven to live in place, in their homes, where they were in their comfort zones, because we have very few. I probably could count on this hand and still have fingers left down how many housing developments and long-term care facilities that we have that are specifically LGBT&T friendly. We're getting a few more, and organizations are starting to pay attention and throw some grant money on that. But a lot of places, older LGBT&T individuals are afraid of being discriminated against, right? In our discussions, some of you brought up the recent case in Iowa where the transgendered woman was thrown out of her nursing home, and there was another case in Iowa as such. There have been other cases around the country. So they're more likely to live more poorly and in more adverse health conditions in their own home than get what I would consider potentially better physical and mental health care in a facility that was comforting or a good context. So for those of you who work in long-term care settings, I want you to just think about your own setting, and do you know older adults who are out in that setting? Do you feel staff would be appreciative of that? And we have those couple of articles that you're reading about that particular issue. And one, thankfully, saying that we can shift attitudes of staff and make them more culturally competent and accepting of LGB&T individuals in their care so that we don't have discrimination and more problems. You know, we don't want an institutional care setting, a nursing home, assisted living to be any more adverse than it needs to be. It should be home-like, and that includes not being afraid of being discriminated against. So I'm looking forward to the day when we have just as many LGBT friendly care homes that are competitive in the market as we do non-LGBT specific homes, so that there is somewhat of a balance for people to choose if they want. I'd probably live in one because it probably would be a really cool place to be. And I am, in fact, heterosexual. But, okay. So let's go here to talk a little bit about relationships in the article. In the article, when we look at relationships in LGBT older adults, we don't have a lot of information. We have some on older gay couples and older lesbian couples, but a lot of what we have is also same-sex marriage being legal. So one of the major issues, right, for older LGBT individuals is the rights and the benefits of marriage, and kind of being barred from that for a long time. So when you're in those types of long-term relationships and you're not allowed to be able to exercise the rights of being married, that leaves you out of benefits. It leaves you out of visitation rights. It leaves you out of healthcare decision-making. So again, those relationships can be challenging. Also, we have the issue of discrimination, ageism, and being out as an older individual. A lot of people have anecdotal stories about wanting to be seen as roommates, you know, or something more acceptable to adult children or things like that. And a lot of times then when the relationship ends for whatever reason, whether that would be just a mutual separation or one person passes away, it leaves you without a lot of the benefits that are conferred to heterosexual couples in marriage. Whether that's a partnership, a same-sex partnership, a union, whatever it is, you know, all of the benefits that would go along with that. So that's one major issue for couples, is this idea that we're with a social and legal structure of marriage that have been precluded from for a long time. And potentially, even though it's becoming legal across the U.S., that, you know, older adults may not be able to choose that option, given that they may not be out. They may not feel supported in that. So that's my lecture on LGBT&T elders. I will refer you again to SAGE, which is a great resource, and I will lament the fact that we do not have information on older adults who are LGBT in their sexual expression, and maybe some of the different factors that might be related to that. You know, certainly we know things about sexual health and sexual risk, and that if you are an older gay male, you're more likely to be at risk for having HIV or AIDS, according to current statistics, than your heterosexual or non-gay counterparts. But we don't know a lot about sexual expression in general. What are the, you know, what might be different benefits, what might be, different supports, all the things that we've been talking about, and the different types of factors that might go into that. Certainly, many of them could likely be the same, right? So we look at the biopsychosocial aspects of sexuality for an LGBT elder. They may not be all that different. There's certainly a lot of overlap, but when you think about this, particularly the social side, there's going to be some major impacts. We talk about the types of relationships that exist, marriage again being sort of precluded for a lot of these older cohorts, discrimination on top of ageism, discrimination for LGBT&T older adults in general. So those are really going to affect your sexual expression, on top of not discussing sexuality, sexual orientation, sexual expression with providers. So, all right. Stay tuned. In a day or two, I'm going to post the sort of palliative care / end of life and sexuality mini lecture here from Boulder while I'm learning some statistical software, which is extremely boring, so I won't go into it. But I'll be posting that again. And if you have questions about your final projects, finishing up assignments, any of those things, please email me. I'm certainly available. So you're running at the end of the race. You can see the finish line. It's almost there. And we'll be talking to you guys in a couple of days.